I'm not pulling in my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for the drive to work, coronavirus edition. Okay, I'm having lots of fun talking with people about Magic's past. So today I have Ethan Fleischer. We're going to talk all about Amonkhet. Hey, Ethan.
Hi, how's it going, Mark?
It's going good. Amonkhet. So this was a set where you and I co-led the set. So I sort of led the first half of design. It's back when it was design development. You did the second half. So
That's right.
and we were both on it for the whole time. Just we sort of handed the reins halfway through.
Switched who was responsible for making decisions and maintaining the file and writing documents and stuff.
Okay, so what is your memory of Amonkhet? When you think back to Amonkhet, what first jumps to mind?
Oh, I just remember this. It's a lot of visual memories, right? I feel like ancient Egypt, which Amonkhet was based on, is a very sort of visually splendiferous setting. And because a lot of what we know about it is from ancient artifacts and ancient buildings, and so a lot of the illustrations that we made pop to mind for Amonkhet, the windblown sand and the pyramids and the costumes.
Well, I remember very early on, Jeremy Jarvis was the creative director at the time, and he was like, "No dusty Egypt. It's got to be bright, sunny Egypt." And like, there's a lot of tropes just because so much of Egypt is through archaeology and stuff.
Right, because there are two Egypts, right? There's Egypt as it was, in ancient times, and then there is the Egypt of like 1920s British archaeologists discovering Egyptian artifacts, and Jeremy was very much interested in the first thing and not at all interested in the second thing, and so we really focused in on Egypt as a living, vibrant culture rather than a collection of dusty artifacts.
Yeah, I remember one of the things we did early on. So this was part of what we called the Bola saga, which was a 3-year Bola story that ended up with War of the Spark. And so one of the things I know that came really, really early on was the idea that this was like one of Bolas's like not homeworld. He's from Dominaria, but like he was up to something. That this is a world in which it reflected his influence.
Right. We didn't think that there was quite enough meat on the bone of just ancient Egypt to base 2 entire sets around that, and so we wanted what's the other angle here that will make this uniquely Magic the Gathering, and we thought Nicol Bolas's influence here. What if there was an entire society that he had dominated here, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I know pretty early on, one of the things that I think this came out of Exploratory is the idea of that there was a dissonance and that the people of the world weren't unhappy, but that the Gatewatch show up, obviously, in this story. And, like, to them, everything seems horribly wrong, but the people who live there, they're absolutely fine with it. And that it's this weird society that, like, it runs the way it runs, and they're very happy with it, even though from an outside perspective, it seems weird.
Right. It was supposed to be a dystopia where everybody was sort of artificially happy with the status quo in a way that was creepy. And to me, that was one of the most satisfying things about Amonkhet was that idea of creative dissonance where like horrible things would be happening, but they would be named something very nice, which you often see in totalitarian states, right? Democracy square in the middle of an oppressive dictatorship, things like that.
Yeah, and so one of the big things mechanically was, what we wanted was, we want the mechanics to feel as mean as possible, and the creator to feel nice, right? So that it had this play dissonance. Like, the set didn't play like it was a nice place, but all the names and the art was saying it was a nice place.
Right, and so I was very excited when I found a reprint for Amonkhet when we were working on it, and it was a card from, I believe it was from Onslaught, called Unburden, and it's a discard spell. It makes you discard 2 cards, makes the player discard 2 cards, and had cycling. And like cycling, we put cycling in the set, and like the idea that unburden, that sounds good, right? I want to unburden, but I'm going to unburden you of your mind, right? Like the picture has a minotaur being, having brain surgery put on him or something, and he's kind of looking a little dumb.
So the way we thought about the set when we were designing it was we did kind of divide it in two. We said there's the Egypt part of the set, that's all the top-down, ancient Egypt, and then there's kind of the bolus part of the set of the sort of, the meanness of sort of like, feeling like a world that Bolus had influenced.
Right. In fact, we made a Venn diagram with like a Bolas circle and an Egypt circle, and like all the items that were sort of, one or the other, or things that felt like they overlapped.
Okay, so why don't I just as a structural thing, why don't we start with the Egypt part first and talk about sort of capturing Egypt. So what part of Egypt would you like to start with?
I feel like mummies is a great place to start, right?
Sure.
That's a monster that is uniquely Egyptian themed. Now, the idea of mummies that roam around and fight people, obviously, it belongs much more to that 1920s British explorer trope space, the Universal monster movies and such. But we went that far. We're like, yes, we're gonna have mummies walking around, and so we made a whole keyword mechanic around that, which was embalm, that would allow you to make a token copy of a creature from your graveyard. So you could pay some mana, exile the creature from your graveyard to make a token that's a copy of it, except it's a white zombie, in addition to its other colors, its other types. And the reason that we wanted to do that instead of like unearth was because we got to show the before and after. Like, here before, this person is alive. Afterwards, now they have been wrapped in bandages and they're a mummy now. So it was a fun way. We made bespoke tokens for each of the embalm cards, which at the time felt like a big ask. I was like, oh man, can we get like 12 new token arts or whatever? Is that even possible? But Jeremy loved the idea. He was the art director for the set, and he was very excited about the idea, and was happy to devote the extra resources at a time when we didn't have as many resources as we do now.
Yeah, I just want to point this out. It's important for the audience to understand when we have to make a magic set. Like, there are real world restrictions. You have so many pieces of art, and like even for tokens, normally you only have so much token art. So what we were asking for was more than we were allotted. So that required us to go get permission and say, "Hey, here's a cool idea. Can we get this extra resource?" And we were told yes, but that's not always the case,
Right. Sometimes it's just a matter of budgetary constraint, and sometimes it's just a matter of like bandwidth. Like, are there enough people to write the art descriptions and enough artists with time available who can illustrate the cards? There's not an infinite supply of anything in the world. So. Yeah. But fortunately, they were able to do that, and I was very happy with how the embalm cards turned out.
Yeah, the tokens were really cool too. And the other thing the creative team did, was they concepted all of them so each one had a different shape to it. So yes. like there was no repeats. Like everyone was a cool.
You wrap someone in bandages, they look a lot like someone else in bandages. So they definitely found ways to mix it up. Or like, this one's a cat and this one is an angel with big wings, right? Things like that.
So, real quickly, since we're talking about zombies and you mentioned cats, so zombies was our one main tribal thing in the set. Normally in sets that aren't tribally focused, we tend to have like one tribal thing. Players like tribals. And zombies, one of the cool things about zombies was the story made sense for white zombies. Because in the story, the zombies, or the zombies in the city are servants. They're
the sanctified dead. Elaborate religious rituals had been performed upon them, and they were holy in some sense, right?
Right, and then also there were black zombies that were outside the city that were like kind of wild, more vicious kind of zombies.
Yeah, they were evil monsters that hungered for human flesh.
But one of the cool things, and this is one of the things we always think about, is we had white and black zombies with some zombie tribal, and then Innistrad was in standard with us, and they had blue and black zombies. So, it's sort of like we could add to zombies, but here's a new thing. It's white zombies. We hadn't done white zombies before. And it's not easy. Like, certain concepts are hard to find. Like, zombies as a white concept is weird. Like, we found one and it worked, but, there's not a lot of worlds where white zombies make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and we didn't set out to say, is there some way to do white zombies? It was more like, what what should mummies be? Well, why not white zombies? Makes sense here.
And I was going to say, the one other thing we did do, tribally, because you mentioned it, is we did have a little cat theme we ran through the set, which was another Egyptian thing.
Right, because the ancient Egyptians worshipped cats. So it might have been the first cat tribal reward that we've ever printed in Magic.
I think it was.
If it wasn't the only one, it was certainly one of very few when we made that cat lord.
And it was the most powerful. If one existed, it was nowhere as powerful as that one. But that was made. We made it to go, okay, cat lovers, we can go build a cat deck.
The players loved it, and like since then we've had a cat themed commander deck. We've had like cat themed jumpstart boosters. Like cats have taken off in a big way, and I'm glad that we were able to embrace people's love of cats, because lots of people like cats, not just ancient Egyptians, but people alive today who like to buy Magic cards.
But one of the things Amonkhet added to the world of Magic is a focus on cats, which was, I mean, cats existed before then, obviously, but more of a tribal focus. Okay, what else did we do? What other Egyptian things did we do?
Well, a lot of things that people associate with Egypt are artifacts, costumes and tools and canopic jars, the pyramids, the Sphinx statue. So there were quite a lot of artifacts in Amonkhet, actually, even though it wasn't an artifact themed set. So one type of artifact that we made a few of were these sort of work in progress artifacts, where they would start out partially built, and you would have to add brick counters to them various ways to complete them. And this was kind of inspired by the Civilization video games, where you would build great monuments, and they would give you some special power if you managed to complete them before the other players complete their version of it. So we had a few cards like that. And we also had the monuments. Each color was kind of headed up by a god. There was a pantheon of 5 gods, one for each color. And then there were various other cards associated with each of the gods, including this big monument that was like the temple to that god. And each one was a legendary artifact that did something cool when you cast a creature spell of the appropriate color.
Yeah, actually, each color had a little bit of a theme that ran through it. They had the god, and then there was a bunch of different components that all sort of tied together.
Right, there was like the god and the trial and the cartouche and the monument. And if you put all 4 of those things together in a deck, they would kind of have a strategic direction to them.
Yeah, so this was the second set that had god. I mean, we had gods in Theros, obviously. And I know one of the challenges, speaking of Egyptian things, one of the challenges was, okay, how do you not do ancient Egypt? You got to do gods, and how do we capture gods in a way? Because we didn't have devotion. Like, how do we capture gods in a way that felt like gods, but also felt like Egypt?
Yeah, we didn't want to do devotion again, and we didn't want to do enchantment creatures again. We wanted to make these gods feel pretty different from the ones in Theros, and ultimately, we decided devotion wasn't appropriate. These gods were here whether people worship them or not. And we had to find a different mechanic to represent their immortality rather than just indestructibility. We didn't want to kind of paint ourselves into a corner, because we knew eventually we were going to go to Kaldheim and do Norse mythology. And so we wanted to make sure that there were like some elements in common between the Amonkhet gods and the Theros gods, but we didn't want so many elements in common that players would think it was weird when we did something a little farther afield when we went to Kaldheim. So it was important to mix it up a little bit. So each god had more of a thing that it cared about rather than each caring about devotion.
Okay, also, you mentioned the cartouches. Want to talk about the cartouches?
Right. The cartouches were special auras. They even had a special subtype, because these represented the sort of medals that would be awarded when when somebody completed one of the 5 trials that they had to go through in order to go into the happy afterlife that was supposedly awaiting them. So each of the trials, I believe, would one of the cartouches. Is that right?
Yeah.
No, whenever a cartouche entered the battlefield, each of the trials had an ability that triggered when it entered the battlefield, and then whenever you played a cartouche, you could return the trial from the battlefield to your hand, so you could play it again and get that enter the battlefield trigger again.
Right. A big part, just so people understand the story, was there were 5 trials. Like the whole idea behind this world, the city, was that you went through these 5 trials, and that along the way you often died, and that if you made it all the way through, then you would be like gloriously killed and get a great reward in the the hereafter. Secretly behind the scenes, Bolas is building a zombie army. So
right. In fact, this was just a giant. This entire city was a machine designed to sort people out into not very good warriors and good warriors, and the good warriors would be turned into members of his eternal army that he used to invade Ravnica later in the story.
But so each color had a god associated with it, and there was a trial, and there was. I don't know if you remember. Each color had a word associated. I can't remember all this because it's so long ago. But there was like
there was. Right, there was the trial of solidarity for white, the trial of knowledge for blue, the trial of ambition for black, the trial of zeal for red, and the trial of strength for green. Though they weren't gone through in that order.
No, I think it was, you started with white, then I think you did green, then blue, then black, then red. Is that right? I know you ended in red.
I remember red was last.
Yeah, red was last, and I think white was first. Yeah. But yeah, each one of them, they're just different kind of tests. Like, and the red one was a fight that you fought at the end, and then if you were the last one standing, then Bowls killed you, or one of the gods killed you. Like
Hazaret,
the red god killed you. Yeah,
personally.
Right.
The sort of final Egyptian element that we put in, aside from visual design stuff, which was considerable, but from a game
and top down, there's lots of one of top downs.
We had deserts. So there was a card from Arabian Nights called Desert that had the subtype Desert, and that was the only card with the subtype Desert for most of Magic's history. But we decided to make several new deserts in Amonkhet and in Hour of Devastation, the second set of the block, and some cards that cared about deserts.
Okay, you said that was the last Egyptian thing. What do you consider Aftermath?
Oh, Aftermath.
Is that Egyptian or is that more Bolas? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Aftermath, I think, is more of a... It doesn't feel especially flavorful as far as... I don't know.
Okay, maybe that's more on the Bolas side. So, okay, we talked Egypt. So let's get to the Bolas side. So, okay, so why don't we start by talking about -1 counters?
Right. So we try... I am losing my connection.
Well, I will start. So one of the things we knew early on is we wanted it to be...
You're not.
We wanted it to have a very harsh feel to it. And one of the ways we had known from when we had been on in Shadowmoor was that -1 counters feel very mean. It definitely has a very sort of odd feel to it. And so that was one of the ways that we thought we could add this mean quality, if you will. And there's a lot of controversy at the time. I've talked about this on my blog, on my podcast, and not podcast, on my articles a little bit, and that -1 counters are kind of hard to use. Normally, when you when you use +1/+1 counters, you're building things up, you're making things stronger, things are growing in strength. But when you use -1/1 counters,
it helps the game to advance.
Right, it helps the game to advance.
Ultimately, the goal of a Magic game is for one of the players to be reduced to 0 life points.
Right, and the problem we run into in a minus one world is it sort of makes things go away rather than get bigger. Like, it doesn't make the game end; it slows the game down.
Right.
But we were very. I mean, at least I was very. I really wanted to use minus one counters. I thought, like, if we're going to capture the sense of this being a harsh world, that minus one did a really good job of feeling harsh.
Yeah, I agree. It made it feel like a dangerous place with a hostile environment.
Okay, so what else? Let's talk the Bola side of things. Let's talk about Exert.
Right. Exert was something that felt a little more unique to the specifics of this setting. Like, there were all of these essentially warrior athletes who were trying to outdo each other in these various trials. And Exert kind of represented them striving for excellence. So Exert was an ability that allowed you to tap a creature and make it so that it didn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So it was kind of double tapping it, where it took 2 untap steps for it to untap. And that would give you some special ability. They were different from card to card. And those happened. I guess that happened when they attacked, right? So when they attacked, you could do something, and then if you did, they wouldn't untap.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty cool mechanic. I thought it was. It's a neat resource. Like, one of the things we're always looking for is what else? What other costs could you pay? And this was kind of like, oh, well, maybe the cost you pay is untapping. That's a different kind of cost.
Yeah, and it was a mechanic that encouraged aggressive play, and a lot of the rest of the set, cycling and Aftermath of kind of reward slower play where you want the game to drag out, and we wanted a mechanic that for aggressive decks. As it turned out, the Fervor cards were a little stronger than in the real world than they were in our playtests, just due to the large number of players being able to optimize how the set was drafted, and it turned out that the Fervor cards were a little too strong and kind of pushed out some of those slower strategies once the draft format matured.
Okay, so you mentioned Aftermath. What do you remember the origin of Aftermath?
I remember we were excited about cards that had 2 different card types on them because there was the Delirium mechanic in Shadows over Innistrad.
Right.
This is just intolerable. Sorry about that.
No. We're having little audio issues here, but
right, and so we wanted to have split cards that could have 2 types on them. That was how we originally came to Aftermath. Was like we want instant on one side and sorcery on the other. And eventually we came to the idea of, like, what if we kind of fused split cards and flashback, where you could get one effect the first time you cast a spell from your hand, and a different effect when you cast it from the graveyard.
Yeah, we tried a lot of visual ways to represent that. The one we finally ended up with was they were oriented differently. So, like, in your graveyard, you could sort of orient them so you could see them.
Right, yeah. The idea was that you could kind of arrange them in such a way that you could easily see the Aftermath cards sticking out and see what they were. I'm not sure that it was entirely a satisfactory implementation overall, but the cards are pretty fun to play with. Yeah,
mechanically the cards are a lot of fun. The frame layout, probably there's other executions we could have done. We tried a lot at the time.
Yeah, we did try a lot of things, and ultimately they ended up looking a little weird. We did end up with some interesting art pieces, though, because one of the card halves had like a super wide screen, very, very wide aspect ratio to the art, which allowed us to get some unusual illustrations in there.
Okay, so the one other mechanic that I don't think we've talked about yet is cycling. We mentioned in passing. Do you remember where cycling? Like, why cycling? Why did cycling enter the set?
Cycling was something that Eric Lauer, who was in charge of the the sort of late design, we call set design now. We called it development at the time. He was very keen for us to put cycling into the set. He thought that there were a lot of opportunities to make constructed cards by using the cycling mechanic. And ultimately, it felt like it interacted pretty well with what the rest of the set was doing. So I was happy to accommodate him.
I mean, the one thing about cycling is there's really no set that you can't make cycling work in.
Yeah, I mean, cycling is a flavor neutral mechanic. It doesn't really imply anything about the story. So it was definitely more there for standard constructed reasons than it was for sort of internally self-consistent limited reasons. But it's something that is very easy to make work in a set because it's a very solid mechanic.
Okay, so this set was pretty full. I do want to mention one other fact. So between -1 counters and exerting and brick counters and all sorts of things, so Dave Humphreys, who led the development of the set, decided to make punch-out cards, which is the first time Magic has done punch-out cards.
Yeah, so they were like a card-shaped object with perforations in it, and so you could punch out various little counters and things. So there were -1 counters you could punch out. There were brick counters. There was a little rectangle that said exerted. So you could use these as play aids while you were playing with the cards, and the players liked them, I think.
No, I actually think that's. I mean, we've gone back and used them again because they're useful, and so as someone looking for future designs, the punch out card really has interesting potentials for future possibilities. So
yes, and anything that you can put into a booster pack is exciting to us because that's how we sell Magic cards. And like, wow, here's a different thing we can put into booster packs. That is exciting. That fires the imagination of people like us.
And also it's pretty flexible. Like there's a lot of things you can do.
Yes,
we had a hackathon one time. We were looking at future things, and my team, one of the things we were looking at was like other components. And so we did a brainstorm on punch-out cards, and there's a lot of things you can do with punch-out cards, just because it's like you can print whatever you want and punch it out. So I'm glad we introduced it. I think that was a cool thing the set introduced. Okay, so looking back, there's cartouches and brick counters and split cards and aftermath and cycling and embalm and exert and deserts and zombies and lots of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. Do you think in retrospect there is too much going on?
I think there is, or at least I think that there is more going on than is necessary. The set felt a little too complex to me, and also, like, I wasn't especially happy with where we ended up with the aftermath frame design. So, and I don't mean that as a knock against the designer who designed the frame. I don't have a better idea. I'm not like, if only we'd done it this way. I think there may not have been a great solution to aftermath, and I probably, if I could go back in time, I probably would not have made the aftermath cards in the final version of the set.
Yeah, I mean this set was the very experienced drafters actually really liked this set just because some of the complexity gives you so much sort of things you can do with it when you're drafting.
It's just because of some of the sort of speed issues. Some of the things like large creatures with cycling and stuff were kind of forced out of playability in draft often, just because there were some decks that just kind of were so fast that they made it hard for slow decks to compete.
Yeah, I know when Hour of Devastation came out, it helped it a little bit. It helped slow it down a little bit because there were some more answers to stuff.
No, my impression was that the full block draft with Hour of Devastation was very well regarded, and that kind of course corrected the speed problems to where the speed was at the right level again. But since then, I feel like we've kind of learned that we need to build in safety valves so that like if the format is faster or slower than our internal testing suggests, then there are enough things to do. That's something that we have to focus on when we're refining the design of sets for limited.
So I can see my desk here, so I'm almost to work. So my final question to you, Ethan, is looking back, what is your big takeaway? Sort of like with some time looking, because this is one of your earlier sets, not your first set, but one of the earlier sets you worked on. What is your takeaway looking back on Amonkhet?
My big takeaway actually is has little to do with like the mechanics of the set or the complexity of the set, and is more about remembering that every Magic set is somebody's first Magic set, and Amonkhet block, situated as it was right in the middle of this large story, didn't feel like it stood on its own well enough. It felt like it required too much context of knowing what had been happening in the story before this, and too much of its appeal kind of rested on that knowledge. And so I think that it wasn't quite as accessible to people who are coming into Magic for the first time as I would have wanted it to be.
No, it is hard, right? Any one set is somebody's first set, and you have to sort of keep that in mind.
Yep.
The thing I did love is we had wanted to do Egyptian top-down, Egyptian set forever. Like we had talked about doing Egyptian sets like back in the like late 90s, like for a long, long time, and it was fun to finally do it. And like, there's a lot of just really cool, evocative things that I'm so happy we got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really nailed a lot of the Egyptian themes. I was very happy with the creative dissonance of the creepy story we were trying to tell there. I felt like it definitely felt like it succeeded on an artistic level in a way that really satisfied me.
And the other thing I enjoyed was not only, obviously, we did a lot of Egyptian influences, but also we created a world that had its own sense to it. Like while clearly we were influenced by Egypt, no doubt, that the world of Amonkhet had a very distinctive like Amonkhet feel. That wasn't just like, oh, this is exactly like ancient Egypt. It was sort of, we made our own world, and I liked all the gods and the trials and how the world had a very sort of living element to it that the gameplay did a really good job of demonstrating.
Absolutely. Well, I've got to go now, Mark. I've got another meeting.
Okay, well, I'm at my desk, so I guess we got to call this wrap. So thanks, Ethan. Thanks for being with us.
I'm happy to be here.
And so I'm at my desk. We all know what that means. It means that instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. So I made it to work. So I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.